Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam bahagia. Good morning and welcome to this very important 2024 ASEAN Banking and Fintech Summit. Now, for me, at the outset of this important Banking and Fintech Summit, to talk about ethics and integrity in banking might look like it is on the reverse side, because ethics, integrity, or morality is an element that is ingrained in the conduct of every individual, whether you are in banking or in any other enterprise, or even in your social and other commitment. And therefore, we look at this area of banking, and particularly in the transformation about which Tan Sri Michael was mentioning. It looks a little bit outstretched for me to address this. First of all, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, thank you very much for inviting me to say or to give this special address, and I take this opportunity to welcome His Excellency Sarat Eng, the Secretary of State, Advisor to Royal Government of Cambodia on Foreign Investment and International Relations. Welcome to Malaysia and welcome to this summit. Now, yes, thank you. Thank you. Cambodia is very close to us, very close within the ASEAN, and therefore our dual bilateral relations will blossom with your arrival, and we continue to engage with your other counterparts there, including your ministers. Now, Tan Sri Michael did mention about this restructure and resilience that is going on. I don't want to take on those areas, actually. Let me just look at the 4 T's that have been mentioned earlier. You talk about trust, technology, talent, transformation. And I'm very happy to see the organizers have put trust right at the beginning of these 4 T's. If you do not have trust and the basic element inherent in any of these, whether it is technology, talent, or transformation, you will go on the wrong track. I think that is the first message that I would like to put. And when you talk about the future proof of banks, we have to ask these questions. What is the future for? Are we talking about for the banks themselves? Or are we talking about why banks do exist in the first place? That is, for the benefit of the clients, or the consumers, or, for example, the public at large, for which banks and financial institutions provide their services. And the whole scenario and spectrum of this area is on continuous change. And this morning, just before we got into the main part here, just interacting with a couple of people like you, and then we see a lot of tech players are coming into the scene. And we have the presence. And the most important and challenging area for the banks is how do you bring technology to the banks and through the banks to the consumers and the clients. And in this process, there are a lot of dangers and risks that are involved. And one of the major areas is, of course, trust. Let me just look at a couple of points. They say there is one profession which is the oldest. I don't want to mention that name. I think many of you who are laughing, you know what it is. But banking, it is said, is one of the oldest and most important service that has been the backbone in the global economy for thousands of years. It's a banking service. Although they did not call that banking as such, nevertheless, it is there. And if you look at the history and evolution, which is very complicated, you will see that continuous engagement of modifications came in. Inventions, regulation, and expansion, stretching from first forms of money lending. Banks were nothing more than people who had money. They started to lend it, and then, of course, the religion comes into. If you are very productive in that area, there is a restriction on the productivity of the entire economy. So religion says you can't just lend money and earn interest. But now advanced computerized banking is completely on the other end of the spectrum. And this is where the challenges are coming in. And you have the intermediation between those who had the money and those who wanted to use the money for productive purposes. If it is not going in the right way, then somebody has to come in the middle and provide the intermediation. The intermediation was, of course, done by the banks. And to control the banks, the central banks came into existence. I don't want to go into the history of that. But now what is happening is that when the central banks are being, I don't want to use the word threatened, but there are changes that are taking place. Crypto and digital banking is creeping in and say that we don't need the banks, we don't need the governance of the central banks, we will directly reach to the consumers. And therefore, this is the biggest challenge everybody is facing, and consumers to some extent are moving in that direction, and they say, hey, don't go into that, you will get burned. Some got burned, I do not know some or more got burned, but a lot of people or some people did make money, and they are continuing to make money, and this becomes the outside ambit of banking and central bank governed financial system. I don't want to go to the history of that. I just want to say to my good friends from the Islamic faith, when we talk about this banking in the classical times and how things got into, the Prophet ﷺ himself was known as Al-Amin. Al-Amin actually means the most trustworthy. And at that particular time, about 650 AD, when the people said that, I want to put my money or wealth or whatever you have into the hands of somebody whom we can trust, then that person was the Prophet himself. And that is why he was called Al-Amin. I'm just saying in passing. This is not a religious sermon or anything like that. The same thing was practiced. You will find that when the other religious people, particularly the Jews and some Christians, and then you will know the basic element that was inherent in the early banking was trust. Because there was an established relationship between clients based on trust and reputation. If you don't have a reputation, and if you don't hold on to the reputation by your trust then you're not trustworthy. And this is where, in the evolution of banking, you will find the name Lombard, the Lombard of the Italian area, where they came into a little bit more sophisticated in providing the financial services. And those of you who have gone to London and walked through the banking area, it is also known as the Lombard Street, taking recognition of the contributions that they have made in London, a vital center for banking and finance. And of course, those who are in the banking, they will know the bank is no longer just one wholesome name. We have banks which are called investment bank, merchant bank, private, and also wealth management bank. So many differentiated sectoral and targeting consumers and clients in many different ways, basically looking at how we will satisfy the needs of the consumers. Now, you'll find that there is also a relationship between banks and temples in the classical, Before the banks became like an institution, you'll find that the temples are the places where such banking services or lending services or credit was given, not only for money, but for other products, because banks got involved at that particular time, not only with money, but there were other valuable items which I do not want to elaborate. So now what we find is that as the modifications, the restructuring, and various technological advancements are taking place, there is a little bit of drop in the trust element. I do not know whether you agree. The more the banking evolution is taking place, the less and less the trust element is coming in. You have to be very careful from where you take that money and where the money is going to go. There are many ways in which the intermediation is being handled, not by professionals, but by professionally competent rogues. I do not know whether you agree with me, but that is the sort of, so it becomes a very big challenge for governments, particularly the central banks. Are the central banks now bombarded with a lot of accusations saying that consumers are being taken for a ride because the central bank is incompetent, is not competent enough to look at that, and they are slow on the trail to provide the trust element into that. So you look at whether the bankers themselves are trustworthy. This is where the area of ethics and integrity comes in, and those people who are working in the banking industry also will have to take on this responsibility. Now, the governance issue comes in very, very strongly. If you have trust going down south, less and less trust, governance goes on the higher and higher scale. Now, why does this governance comes in? By law, if there is no personal integrity and moral values imbued in you, then the government says by law, by the statute, by the state, you have this system, and then by the whole ecosystem of the banking industry, what do you have? If you are a bank, then you must subject yourself to as a commercial entity. Therefore, before the Banking Act comes in, the Companies Act comes in. You must be governed by some of these laws. The company law And then you have the Banking Act, and then other instruments such as AMLA, anti-terrorism financing, and so many variations of laws come in to say that, hey, you are walking, but you can't walk straight. You have to be governed by many other areas. And when banks become entrenched into the other system, that is the stock exchange and the share market, then you'll find that the Bursa Malaysia or the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange and the Securities Commission and others come in. So today, bankers are not simply free, you can go and do whatever you like, but you're governed by the entire structure of the ecosystem of law and actions of that science. So this comes into a steady area of what are the values that you develop. First is there a corporate culture which values what we call ethics and integrity? Or you can do anything you like, and then we will cover it up in some way. So there is the corporate values, and whether it is from the top or bottom up, that I leave it to you. The second one is the person who is leading that organization has got leadership values. Apart from his own corporate values, he said, corporate values I will follow. More than that, I have my personal values, and my personal values are dictated by, one, by my religion, are dictated by my culture, and dictated by my family and other environmental considerations. This is where now we come into the context of ethical banking and what banks can do and cannot do, what banks are actually forced to do and not to do. So this leads to self-induced, what I call core moral values. Are our bankers imbued with these values? Are our organizations generally accept these values? And is our corporate culture and our national philosophy is coming into? Just in passing, this morning, those of you who have looked at the social media would have known this news. But this morning, if you take the newspaper, the big comment is a very distinguished politician is completely got out of the corruption actions and so on. I don't want to judge this. But what I'm saying is that the public perception of what the values, so this affects the whole of the nation. And I know some Singaporeans are here with us. And the news also says one Singapore minister who had some problem is now recuperating in Australia and is out of the hospital. What I'm saying is that the country's system is looking at the moral and the ethical aspects of these values for it to say, this is a good country and this is where you conduct your business, and therefore within the banking and finance sector, that is. So this is the area of what we call ethics, ethical practices, and moral values. So let me just wind up this by looking at the core set of principles and ideals that govern how banks interact with the following people: the clients and customers. Your responsibility is not only with your clients and customers. Earlier we said that in the classical and the sort of intermediation that has gone on, to just focus on your clients. Today there are stakeholders. The shareholders will come, including a wider perspective of stakeholders, and the community at large also is coming into action with the banks. and therefore the moral responsibility of the banking sector, not only the banking sector, the entire business sector is looked at it, and that is the final. The planet and the world becomes more and more important. If you don't take care of the environment, if you don't take care of the planet, if you don't take care of the world and the society, you are lost in the wilderness, and we are moving into a destructive phase of planet Earth. This is where the trust umbrella widens and covers all that involve a conscious how banking practices should take place, and this is where everybody is talking about ESG that affects the society, affects the environment, and therefore there is more and more governance that will come, and internally banks will have to adjust this within their client, and then externally they will have to adjust this within the whole of the environment. So banks are not only for profit and profit alone, but they have to take other considerations into this area. So finally, I just wanted to mention this. There is a lot of conflict in this area of ethics and integrity in banking. I will just briefly look at these areas and would finally conclude on that basis. One, perception. Although the banks may be able to post a very strong narrative about their conduct, the public, on the other hand, and the consumers, they look at it, the perception is an important area. And a lot of people think that I can do wrong, but my PR can cover it up. It's not the other way around. I'm doing exactly very good, but the perception is that I'm not doing good. So this is a contrarian view. So you say, I'm doing good, and you have to now make it known to the public at large and to the country that your good is appreciated. That is the perception. Then the second one is religion. And the religion says, you cannot do this, thou shalt not do this. But you say, I will do this, and then I will correct it by doing some good. So a lot of bad I can do, I will do good, and therefore it will balance. And His Excellency Sarat Ing is here, and when he came, I just told him the yin and the yang. In the Chinese way of looking at it, you have to balance between the two. So you have got the religions, and then the race. I think we all got our own perception of the race. And then finally, previous experience, industry norms, whistleblowers. I think a lot of this is known to you. With that, it is just my privilege to take this opportunity to address on this area of ethics and integrity, and I hope I have done to rekindle your thinking and perhaps take some thoughts from this. And thank you very much for the opportunity given. Thank you very much.